Congressman, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you today.
As you know, millions of people have lost their jobs over the last couple of years, and especially the older workers, those 50 and older. How do we get those people working again to get the economy going again?
Well, you have to get rid of the recession, and you can't get rid of the recession unless you know where it came from. And the financial bubbles, when they burst, they give you recessions or depression, and we're on the verge of being in a depression for the people who aren't working. Even the young people aren't getting jobs either. So, and this is where I think there's a lot of lack of understanding, because the business cycle comes from the Federal Reserve creating credit, causing interest rates to be lower than they should, and then investors doing the wrong thing, and this creates malinvestment and too much debt. And then when it gets out of whack, the markets send a message and say, you can't sustain this much debt because you built too many houses, you borrowed too much money, you built too much of these things. So the correction has to come in, and the worst thing you can do is to prevent the correction from happening and just propping up bad debt. And that's what we did in 08. There was a lot of bad debt. So the people who were benefiting by the bubble got bailed out, and they dumped the derivatives and the debt onto the people. Then they ended up losing their jobs and losing their houses, and now we're in the midst of this. So if we don't understand that, we don't understand why we have to have less government propping up of the economy. We want to allow these corrections to occur. But you can do a lot of things. Tax codes can be changed. The regulatory code has to be changed. You take something like Sarbanes-Oxley, which was a Republican program. It's cost the businessman $1 trillion. And Dodd-Frank, just recently, it was put in. That cost another $1 trillion. Now the businessman is anticipating all the regulations and the expense from Obama medical care. So if you have that, if you don't correct the monetary system and a tax code and a regulatory system, it's going to be hard to have a recovery. And of course, this is the reason I think spending is the big problem, and why I advise that you do a lot of cutting. And I believe you can't have a recovery unless you understand that, and I have advocated that you get rid of departments as well as cutting spending up to $1 trillion in the first year.
When you talk about these corrections, though, as we wait for these corrections to play out, though, that can be pretty painful.
Yeah, and they take a long time when the government messes it up. We had this same thing occur after World War I, because the Federal Reserve came in 1913, and lo and behold, it was a short time after that, they created a lot of new money to fight World War I. Then there had to be the correction, and that happened in 1921. It was real sharp. GDP went down to 15%. But the government kept hands off and was over in 1 year, and we don't even read about that depression. But in 1930, the attitudes changed, that we had gone into accepting this idea of Keynesian economics, that the reason you have recessions, the people aren't spending enough money, and government should, fulfill the role of spending money. So they preached another doctrine. The Depression lasted till well after World War II, till 1946, until that Depression ended. Japan has accepted that same principle of not having hands off. They're still in the doldrums after 20 years that they had their big bubble and hasn't corrected. So when you get concerned about the length of the recovery, you have to think, what kind of government policies? Adding more taxes and spending and regulations will just prolong the agony.
You hear a lot of people talk about this disconnect we have right now. We have 14 million or so out of work. We have another 8, 9, 10 million, depending on whose numbers you believe, for the underemployed. But yet at the same time, we hear companies talk about they can't find the people with the right skill set. So especially those 50 plus, how do we get them trained with the right skill set so we can fill the jobs that companies say they need?
Well, this demonstrates how poor our educational system is, and the federal government's been involved in that for way too long. They've spent all this money, and what have they done? They pushed the cost of education up. They've enticed people to borrow money. Students are coming out with $1 trillion of debt, and they're not well trained, and the jobs aren't available. You're absolutely right. There are people, they call my congressional office, we need people to come in, and they're not trained well. But what happened is too much planning and designating, and people went in the wrong things. People should go work for a company. They should get training. But so often what happens is is wages are propped up too high, and they won't take low-paying jobs to get the proper training. But the system today, our educational system, is deeply flawed. Has gotten a lot worse in these last 30 or 40 years. So some of the people that are needed right now, they're asking for more immigration on these people that are talented. But I think that's a reflection of a very deeply flawed educational system. And the way we've done it is we pump money into it. If you just pump money into it, whether it's housing or education, all you do is push prices up.
You have more than half of the current retirees out there right now that for them, Social Security is their primary income. That's about all they have coming in. So what can you do to help people when so many people are worried about how they're going to eat, how they're going to pay their mortgage, those kind of things? How can you help them start to prepare for the future and to save for retirement?
Well, the most important thing is to maintain their income. And their income, you know, for last 2 years or so, they have not gotten any cost of living increases, although prices were going up. So they're getting less money. This year they're getting a little bit of boost. But my program of emphasizing the monetary policy shows that would indicate inflation would end. You don't have inflation when you print a lot of money. Print a lot of money, the value of the dollar goes down and cost goes up. So people on fixed incomes receiving Social Security, their income automatically goes down. They suffer the most. So you have to stop the inflation. But over the years, what I've done to try to prevent this from happening was I had a bill that would always have prevented any of the Social Security funds from being spent, and they would have been saved. They would have had a true trust fund. That's not the case. We've taken Social Security funds, spent it on a lot of this overseas activity, which I don't like, and so the trust fund isn't there. So it isn't solvent. So I think the only way we can protect, because I am for slashing, you know, spending, and I talked about $1 trillion, but what I want to have priorities, and one would be those elderly that are dependent on their Social Security or medical benefits or child health care. And I believe that if you cut some of these departments, Department of Education and Energy and all this wars that we don't need, there would be enough money and stop the inflation to take care of the elderly. So, but it means that we have to change people's attitude, because a lot of people think that we have this obligation to be in 150 countries and 900 bases, and that these wars are so necessary, except for one thing now. People's attitudes are shifting on that. They're sort of coming over to my side of that argument and say, this war in Afghanistan has been going on too long. We should spend that money here at home. And you just, you know, stop spending that money, then that money becomes available to take care of these problems that we think are more important.
Okay, so talking about Social Security here, how do you both protect Social Security for those who are already in the system and are drawing from it right now, and then thinking more long term, how do you protect it for the young people who hope to be in it one day?
Well, some of them don't want to be in it, and I'm offering them a chance to get out. Under 25, if they think that they don't want to depend on what's happening, I'd let them get out. And even my program deals with that, because the first reaction would be, oh, that's what they have to take care of us. The young have to pay so the elderly can take it, because we went and wasted all their money. The only way you can do it, my system wouldn't work if we didn't change our foreign policy, quit fighting these wars, cut back on all these departments that we don't need. We could do it. But people should have a right to be out of a system. We argue, conservative Republicans are always arguing for opting out of Obamacare. So why can't we opt out of the system? And young people, agree with this overwhelmingly. But if we don't do anything, let's say we continue to do what we're doing because there's no serious proposals to cut spending and curtail what's happening, everybody loses, because the inflation rate is going to be so high that the elderly will get their checks. And as they've already seen, those checks have been eroded. They'll erode much more severely. So this is the reason why we have to have dramatic changes in the way we spend money in Washington.
Is there any concern then that this puts the risk, while it gives the opportunity and the personal responsibility into this system like this, though, is there then a risk, though, that as these younger folks invest all those years, could they actually come out on the wrong end of it and they get less money than they would have under our current system?
I think that's what you accept in a free society, and they have to understand that. And when I talk to my college crowds, I tell them, I said, if you opt out, if you want to be, on your own, take care of yourself, you can't go and say, oh, I messed up, I want the government to take care of me now. They have to assume responsibility. The fact that it always sounds good, the government gives us a house, gives us education, they'll take care of us forever and ever. It sounds wonderful and is well motivated, but generally politicians abuse this. They overpromise, and then they get too much debt, and then they print up too much money, and they give us a mess like we have now. So it is a major problem, but we could work our way out of it. If we don't work our way out of it, it's going to get a lot worse.
With your ideas, then, you're talking about 25 and under. So then does that then get rid of the talk about, do we need to start looking at raising the retirement age? Is that another factor, or does that not even become necessary?
Well, I haven't needed to calculate that in. If they cut all the spending, now they say they won't cut as much as I want. You'd be forced to, because there wouldn't be any money there to do it. But if you cut the money from the programs, I say you do not have to cut or change the retirement age. I have not proposed that.
What about dependent on how much money a person makes? Some have talked about, if you're really wealthy, maybe you don't need any of that you paid into it.
No, I think that, in a way, this was assumed, at least at the beginning and over the years, it was assumed to be a contract, but the government's already broken the contract because they've spent the money. So I think we should work hard to try to renew the contract, and if somebody happens to be more successful for another, I don't think they should be penalized. So I haven't worked on saying, well, if you're higher income, you're not going to get benefits. Then it truly becomes a welfare thing. I mean, it shifts from a program where there was supposed to be a trust fund to a welfare program, because you're just transferring around and cancel out to people who don't need it. So that would be throwing in the towel. Something like that will happen if we don't do what I'm suggesting and put integrity back into the trust fund.
Let's talk about Medicare. Another thing that people talk about may need some solid reforms here as we move ahead. So how do you, again, do kind of looking at this from both a two-pronged, you're looking both now and later, but then we also have that wild card, which is so huge here, and that's the rising cost of health care. So how does that play into everything to make sure that people get what they're entitled to?
Well, you have to understand why the rising cost of health care is there. Once again, the same reason housing prices went up, same reason educational costs go up. When there's a creation of a lot of new money, we don't know where it's going to go, but Congress sends it in different directions. Where they send it, that's where the prices go up. So there's been a lot of educational program, and housing program, and medical programs. So the quality of education hasn't gone up. Technology hasn't lowered the cost of medical care like it lowers the cost of all other industries, because there's too much money going in. So you have to stop the inflation. You have to stop this, and you have to also allow more competition in the medical system. Today, the corporations really run the show. The drug companies, the insurance companies, they're involved in all the reforms. So if it's prescription drugs, the insurance companies and drug companies like those kind of things, and they actually end up having a lot to say about even in Obamacare. So it isn't socialized medicine as much. It's a privilege for corporations to make even more money. So what are the insurance companies doing right now? They're raising their fees. Another reason the costs are higher for the litigation, the lawsuits that are going on, and I've worked on that, and I have proposals how the market can help this, allowing doctors and patients to have agreements on how to settle disputes, and it's really nasty, because we'd put the attorneys out of business when they want to keep lawsuits. You would agree where the fund is and what you would do and how it would be settled, and those insurance program could protect anybody being injured. When we have car accidents, we don't all go to court. It's almost never you go to court. Your insurance companies take care of it. So you could work that out in medicine. But today, it's illegal for a doctor to do that. And I would like to legalize that, where doctors and the patients can work something out and say, hey, look, let's have an agreement on I deliver babies. Anything happens to the baby, we're going to fight over it. You trust me, I'll do my best. If it happens, the insurance is going to be there. So it could work. But right now, we have all this litigation, I talked to somebody the other day, they had a pulled muscle, it turned out to be, and cost them $11,000 in the emergency room. Half of it is because they need the money and they charge too much, but the other half is, what if you don't do the MRI? What if you get a bump on the head and you miss it? You know the attorneys are going to kill you. So you way over order. And now, I practiced medicine before we had government involved. We always charged the least. And people who didn't have money, they didn't pay. I mean, it was just so different. Now, everybody is charged the maximum, and everybody gets every test, and everybody is struggling. The hospitals need more money, and for instance, we have these mandates on all the hospitals. Illegal immigrants get free medical care. You know, in the old days, the churches did this, but now it's when the government does it that helps push the costs up. So that whole thing would have to have a new approach.
Well, what do you say to the people who say that it's the doctors and the hospitals that are charging too much and taking too much out of this? Since you come from the medical background here, you did this for years. So is greed part of the equation?
There's some truth to that. I don't think that most doctors are greedy, but I think the system is bred into it because costs are going up all the time. Hospitals, if they don't try to maximize them, they go out of business, and it's for the other reasons. Costs go up for the inflation and for the lawsuits, so then they have to charge more. And then in the narrow sense, patients would like to say, oh, it's just the doctors or it's just the hospital. But it's a much bigger picture than just saying that it is. But there's been cases where there's been a lot of abuse. I mean, once the government gets involved, you're always going to have 3, 4, 5% that will abuse it, you know, and pad their bills and do everything. And when I was started, it was unethical to own the equipment that did the tests. But today, you know, because there's these problems, the doctors can own some of these tests, and there is an incentive, you know, to maybe use more tests for that reason too.
But we've heard people running for office talk about the fraud in here and cutting out the fraud forever. How does that actually happen? How do you actually get to the point where the fraud can be stopped,
and they talk
or
about
at least minimized?
They talk about waste, fraud, and abuse,
right,
whether it's medicine or anything. I don't buy into that too much. You have to do your very best to get waste, fraud, and abuse. But once the government gets involved, they mess things up so badly that governments are very good at wasting things, you know, and the fraud, I think, is always going to be there, and it's going to be limited. But waste and abuse and doing the wrong things, this is inherent in government programs, and this is why we end up with financial bubbles and people losing their houses, losing their jobs, and not getting a decent education and owing all this money. This is it's wasteful. To run it that way. That's why I'd like individuals to make decisions, medical decisions. The decision should be made between the doctor and the patient. This is why I'm so strongly in favor of medical savings accounts, that you get to put money away, $3,000, $4,000 a year, you write it off your taxes, and you and I, doctor and patient, makes the decision, and you ask the questions, and doctors, believe me, if they knew somebody was coming in and writing them a check and handing them a check and they didn't have to go through all this bookkeeping stuff, all of a sudden they would charge less, you know, for that. So this is a big problem.
You talk about individual choices. Well, then how much is on us then? How much is on personal responsibility? So you as the physician, you can give your advice. If I choose to not listen to you, if I choose to smoke, drink too much, don't exercise, eat way too much, those kind of things, how much is on me? And should I be essentially punished in some form here because of that?
Are you talking about in the government system when the government pays? Oh, see, that dramatizes the problem. You know, if you had your savings account and it was your money, I could give you advice, and then all I do is you pay me for my advice. I said, don't smoke. But if you smoke, you get sick, you have to pay bigger bills. You have to have your major medical policy. Insurance policy might have to charge you more because you're a smoker and drinker and these sort of things. But when the government when the government does it, there's no incentive because and now this principle, which sounds wonderful, that you can't deny insurance for any previous condition. Well, wait till the last minute. you know, oh, okay, now I'm sick, and you can't turn anybody down. It's sort of like buying car insurance after you have your accident, or buying hurricane insurance once you see the hurricane out there. It's no longer insurance. It's sort of just welfare transfer.
But how do you push people then to make those right decisions and be more proactive before you get to the problems you're talking about?
Well, when it's the government, it only can be done by authoritarianism. Do this or do that, or we'll punish you, or we'll ration the care. Or it will build the cost up, and then there'll be rationing of care. But the market solves that problem rather easily. It becomes a major problem when the government is involved doing that. Because one of the reasons why they'll use the argument, well, I ride a bicycle. They say, you don't like to wear a helmet. No. Well, what if you fall? We have to take care of you. Well, you shouldn't have to take care of me. You know, so why should I have to do certain things because you have to pay for my bills? So all of a sudden you lose some of your personal choices. So one problem leads to another problem, and that's why it's much better to be in the marketplace. And in my effort, you know, in Medicare and Medicaid and all, I want to return to that approach as closely as possible, but it's never quite as good as when the patient has the responsibility himself.
We've talked about a lot of different issues. If elected president, what do you think your priority would be? What's that number one thing you'd want to do once you get in there?
Well, the number one thing I want to do that I could do with less problems from the Congress, because the president is in charge of foreign policy and he's in charge of the military. I could stop the wars, I could bring the troops home, and I could cut spending $200 billion, and I'd be well on my way to saving the money that is necessary to tide people over, whether it's the elderly getting Social Security or Medicare or child health care. So that is something I could do immediately.
Congressman, thanks very much. Appreciate your time today. Thanks for sharing your thoughts.